Hello and welcome to the Be Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership and business from the inside out. And today I'm welcoming from, I'm going to say sunny Melbourne, Oliver Garside. Welcome to the show, Oliver.
Thank you for having me, Bea.
No, thank you. And a big shout out to all the listeners. Happy start of the week for everybody. Hope everyone is feeling vibrant, bright and ready to take on whatever is thrown their way this week. Oliver's just got back from overseas. What did you say, a week ago, Oliver?
Yeah, about a week ago. A nice trip to Europe. So I'm missing, 4 weeks of the depths of Melbourne winter. So I'm just adjusting now to freezing cold Melbourne.
Yeah, totally. I know. Although it is sunny and we haven't had too much rain. So
no, it's a nice day for a Melbourne winter. So, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's get on into it because you are the co-founder and director of Rounded. And how long have you had the company for?
Well, I joined Rounded just about 10 and a half years ago now. So, we thought it might be a 6-month project, but 10 and a half years on, here we are. The company and the idea is a little bit older than that. But yeah, I've been involved for about a decade.
Yeah, wow. 10-year mark. That's always interesting. So Rounded, it's an Australian SaaS platform that helps freelancers and sole traders simplify invoicing, accounting and business finances. And an important shift occurred for you, Oliver, when your journey came through recognizing that for many independent business owners, managing the business can become just as demanding as delivering the work itself. I absolutely agree with that. That insight helped shape Rounded into a platform designed to reduce administrative, I always get that wrong, complexity, giving freelancers more time to focus on their clients, their craft, and building sustainable businesses. Today, Oliver, you and the team continue to champion technology that supports Australia's growing community of freelancers and sole traders, combining practical tools with a customer-first approach to make that business ownership more accessible and less overwhelming. And at the heart of your work is a belief that technology should simplify the way people run their business, creating more space to focus on the work that matters. There you go.
That's a beautiful synopsis there, Bea. Yeah, that's perfect.
I was going to keep going there. Yeah. I was just like, I was on a roll.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I was completely in my own little world then, my own little zone. So Oliver, there's a lot to discuss in terms of, I'll just throw a few themes out there and then I'll let you go with it. SaaS is completely being, almost revolutionized as we know it in terms of with AI coming into play. And I'm keen to talk to you about that because 10 years in the business, you will have seen a lot of change. And I guess the question for that one, is this the most significant change you've ever seen when it comes to a SaaS? The other part is also then, the government and the changes that have happened to us more recently from a budget perspective. And there's been a lot of uproar with sole traders, small businesses, and even freelancers. I'd be interested to understand from you what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Do you think that we're going to see an impact to small business here in Australia because of what's happening right now? So they're probably my first two things, but I'll hand it over to you. You can start wherever you like. They're just some ideas that I thought we could share with the listeners, because I think the listeners are all, whether you're in Australia or whether you're overseas, there is a lot up in the air right now.
Yeah, well, look, I think, when we started, the environment around technology for individuals was completely different. And that underpinned the reason why the first iteration of Rounded was built was to solve a problem. Back 10 years ago, software was generally still for enterprise, for big companies. And this was right at the beginning of perhaps not social media as much, but, right at the beginning of apps that we as consumers now take for granted. High quality apps like Spotify, Uber, Netflix would be 3 of the ones that everybody's familiar with, right? That's consumer-based software, designed for individuals. So what we wanted to do, we looked at the available options out there for Australian freelancers, and they were either built for the wrong type of company, the wrong type of business. They were too complicated. They were too expensive. And there was a really clear gap there, sort of above a spreadsheet and below zero, where a lot of freelancers and sole traders play. So we sort of slotted ourselves into there and, began developing what is now Rounded, specifically to cater for that. You wind forward 10 years now, and everybody's familiar with software. There's lots of consumer software. And even in our particular market, there are now multiple options for users. So it's very competitive.
Yeah.
And it's certainly that there's multitude of options out there for freelancers and sole traders, and everybody has their own sort of little view on what suits them, and that's fine. But fortunately, through that time, we've been able to build a fairly loyal customer base and a reputation for for providing good quality software and a great experience. And I think that we have also avoided the temptation to branch out into small businesses and other types of businesses, which we could have done, but that's made it very easy for us to articulate to everybody, that we are just sole trader specialists. So our messaging and our marketing is simplified because of that, because we have stayed consistent and true to that original idea, which was to be a tool specifically for Australian sole traders and freelancers.
Yeah, which is quite a niche, isn't it? Because if you think about the MYOBs of the MYOBs of the world, the Zeros and, the bigger competition, you don't need necessarily as a freelancer and as a sole trader, you don't need something as like, I shouldn't say big, because I'm not discounting what you offer. It's just that there's almost like the ability to be more bespoke, more boutique, have that kind of one-on-one engagement. It just feels like that you've like tapped into a niche there that there was a gap, and it's interesting, and the ability to be, just because you're a freelancer or a sole trader, I think you might observe this or notice this. Do you get like, does anyone ever say to you, oh, I'm just a sole trader, like I'm not a small business? And looks like, what I'm trying to say here is they look down on themselves for not being a small business versus a sole trader?
There's a lot. Yeah, there are a lot of people that we talk to that perhaps don't have the confidence from the business point of view. Certainly I'd say on the other side of that, the most successful freelancers and sole traders that we do see have one thing in common, and that is they absolutely see themselves as business owners.
Yeah, cool.
They don't sort of say, oh, I'm just a photographer or this or that. They know that they're running their own business. They take a great deal of care and attention into the business side of things. They want to understand their business, the figures, profit, all of that kind of thing. And they treat their sole trader business.
Yeah.
And, that's certainly, it's certainly something that we encourage our customers, is to really lean into that, because it does have it can have a remarkable impact on, how you see yourself, how successful you can be, how your clients see you as well.
Yes. Yeah.
How professionally you work and present yourself is a massive part of being a business owner. So we certainly, that's something that we've always tried to support and encourage. Absolutely. And so it is interesting. There's so much diversity out there in sort of, the type of, customers we have, and the way that people have found to make money just never ceases to astound me. It's just been brilliant to see.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, because I did like it, tapped into the fact that it is interesting times, and there is a lot of economic upheaval, and we've got governments that are, and I'm not trying to be political here in any way, shape, or form, but there's a lot of contentious conversations and decisions being made. What are you seeing? Because I still believe that there's more room than ever for being an entrepreneur or being a sole trader or being a freelancer or starting your own business. It's just finding, the right product, the right service, whatever it is. Like, what do you see that's really interesting in terms of what you just mentioned then?
Well, at the core, I think at the core of what it means to be a freelancer or a sole trader is a passion to do something.
Yeah.
Deep down, most of the sole trader business owners that I see have some kind of talent, whether that's a creative talent or they're a trade or whatever it may be. And as I said, we've seen all sorts of, people making things or, NDIS or whatever it is. People have a passion to be able to do something that allows them to support a lifestyle. Sometimes it's a lifestyle choice and it's not really about the money. Sometimes people want to build a really profitable, successful business and maybe grow it past being a sole trader and employ people and that kind of thing. So everybody's motivations are slightly different. But ultimately, as a sole trader, what we see is that people get involved because they have a passion for something and not necessarily because they're interested in the business side of things. And so, what we try and do is help marry those two things and smooth the transition between one or the other.
Yeah, it's really interesting what about side hustles? Do many of people like you, or many of the businesses, I should say, yeah, well, let's call it a business. Sole trader is a business at the end of the day, a freelancer. They've got their own ABN and everything else. Do you see, like, are many of them juggling two roles as such? Like, is there a lot of businesses that you work with that have that it is a side hustle, and is that at times a bit of a challenge for you guys when you're explaining to them you still need to be serious about the side hustle and you still need to set it up for success?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we have noticed that's changed over the years is that now, people, often business owners, don't restrict themselves to one source of income. They might do something on the side, their own business, but they also might just give themselves some consistency and smooth out the lumpy cash flow. They might have a job, a salaried job, two or 3 days a week, just to make sure that they've got that solid foundation upon which to build a business. I mean, we've been really lucky. So often we see people start a business and it starts as a side hustle, and then we talk to them, and then they get to the point where they take that leap and they leave their salaried job and they go all in on their business, and then you see them register for GST and do all of these sort of exciting things as their business grows and they grow their client base over a number of years. And then, eventually, sometimes we have to say goodbye to them because they get to that point where they become a totally different kind of business, and one that Rounded doesn't as readily support. So, they need a balance sheet and they need payroll and they need all of those things because they start employing people and they take their business and off they go, into, onto the next stage. And it's such a brilliant journey to be a
Yeah,
part of. And
totally.
we're often we sort of hear from our users who've been so happy with us, and they're like really apologetic, like, I'm so sorry, my accountant says I've got to move and I'm employing and you don't do payroll. And we're just like, you go, don't worry about us.
Spread your wings, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the most, that's certainly always been one of the most gratifying aspects of what we've been able to do is have that sort of really positive, supporting, impacts. And if we can, if a business owner can come to us and say, listen, for the past 3 or 4 years, Rounded has been brilliant. It's helped me grow my business, and now I'm on to the next thing. We're just like, well, mission accomplished,
Yeah,
That's what we're there
absolutely.
for. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. Tell us a little bit about your tenure in 10 years and obviously starting in the company for 6 months. So did you start as a freelancer or a contractor? Was that kind of that part of your journey? And then next thing you know, it's funny how the worlds collide. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yes and no. So I had, in about 10 years ago, I had already made the decision that I really wanted to try and find something that was my own. I had a sort of a fairly vanilla corporate career up until that point and was working for a fairly large tech company. And I decided, I think I was able to get, after a restructure, I got a payout, and I thought, well, now's as good a time as any. And so I left that job in December 2015, and then I think went to the UK for Christmas. And then when I came back, I started looking around for various different things, and somebody I knew had invested a little bit of money in getting the first version of Rounded up and running. And we were just chatting, and he said, well, look, I've invested in this app. The 2 guys that have built it are both techies. We need somebody to take control of the business. And there was an opportunity for me to kind of, if everything went well, to become an owner of the business, which is kind of what I was looking for. And it seemed, I had a look at the app. It seemed like it was as good a punt as anything else. And we didn't have to invest any money in it, and it was all going to be sweat. And so we thought, yeah, we'll give it 6 months. And one thing led to another, and I just I guess at the beginning I invested my time, and I certainly joined before we grossed $1. So there were no customers and there was no revenue, and so I didn't get paid for the first couple of years. And
can we pause there, Oliver? Because
yeah,
we don't talk about that enough. Like, everything seems really rosy on the outside. And when you're not paying yourself, not being paid, it can mess with your mindset psychologically because there's no reward. Like, there's a
no,
reward in that and
well,
you go from corporate where you've got this regular salary. And I know even myself, at times there's just this fear, like, is this going to be always like this? Is this it really, you've got to really psychologically work on yourself and have belief even when you don't have belief.
there's a number of different aspects to this. First of all, I guess I have to say that I'm fortunate enough that my wife has a good job, right? So we took a gamble together.
A risk, yeah.
That okay, well, we can survive for a certain amount of time on one income. So that's kind of the mechanics of it, and that wasn't always particularly easy, even psychologically for me, not bringing in any money, and we had to make some sacrifices to be able to do that. But they're the decisions that you make. I think the other really important thing, and this is what I say to people I talk to around it now, is when you start a business or go into a business, you have to be truly honest with yourself about what it is you want out of it. My journey around starting and founding a company and going through that is not what everybody would want. I understand there might be entrepreneurs out there that would look at me and say, well, you didn't get paid for the first couple of years, who would think I was crazy. And that's fine. You would go off on your own journey and do your own thing slightly differently. But, I needed time to lean into being a father. You don't get time. When I started, my kids were 7 and 4. They needed, my wife works full time, they needed a parent, and I was able to lean into that. They're now 17 and 14 and don't talk to me unless they need money or a lift.
Yeah.
So it's very different, it's very different now, right? So, but at the time it was really important. The other thing I found was that when you're not getting paid for something, you really understand what you love doing. I'd been in a corporate career. I'd kind of got a bit lost. I was in a box that I didn't want to be in. I didn't really know what it was that I was passionate about or that I really enjoyed doing. And when you take away the money and the ego and the job title and everything else, and it's like, well, here I am in a position where I've now got to put into practice everything that I've learned over a 20-year career to try and build a company from scratch with no resources, no infrastructure, nobody to ask what to do, nobody else to make the decisions. And I've just got to try and make something happen. That really helped me kind of sweep away all the noise and understand again what I was good at and what I really enjoyed doing. And I couldn't have stayed doing what I was doing for so long had I not found my place again and found what I really love doing and really enjoy doing. So, again, when I look back, what does success look like? Why did I do it? Why was I able to keep going when I wasn't getting paid or getting paid very, very little? For the first 5 years, probably after 5 years, I was probably only just about being paid minimum wage.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
So it certainly wasn't a financial decision. But if your decision is a financial decision, and you go into business, you'll make different decisions than I did. But, I look back over 10 years and think, well, I'm never going to get that time back. I've learned more than I could have learned I've learned more in the last decade than I have in all of the rest of my career. I've learned about running a SaaS business. I've built what is now a successful, sustainable, profitable SaaS business serving thousands of customers all over the country. I've been able to lean in and have the flexibility to my personal life and my parent, being a parent and all of that. So, I take all of that. That's where I was in my life. I was fortunate enough that I had the safety net and support of a partner with a full-time job. So again, not perhaps a decision that everybody can take if they need every dollar to pay the bills, but that was my environment, and that's kind of what I've been able to build off the back of that. And that's, again, in hindsight, probably everything I could have hoped for and more.
Yeah. I think once you take the monetary lens off something like what you're talking about here, and you have to go back to basics, and actually whether you've got a partner supporting you or not, I mean, I don't at this point in time, it does make you, I guess, reassess everything and what's important, what's not important, recalibrate your relationships with, what does money look like, all of that. Like, I actually do think it, whereas what do they say? Sometimes they say that, in the hardest forms of adversity, you look back and go, that was probably one of the best moments of adversity, or, at the time it felt pretty shit, to be honest. And then I'm using that as an analogy because adversity, there's so much to that. Where I'm going with this is, though, like, I think sometimes we get on this treadmill and we're thinking about dollars and the financial reward and the business and the success. And it almost limits us in a way because it limits our creativity, the ideas we might have, coming right back to sole traders, freelancers, that sometimes you have to break through that fear and give it a go. And you can always go back to what you did previously if you have to, and if you need to. And I think it's a real, it's just it's interesting in terms of just the way you kind of reflect on everything. And I mean, I've certainly have, and it's formed a different view for me than I ever would have had if I hadn't have had this experience.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like the hardest thing sometimes is to be honest with yourself. I mean, again, it's sometimes, often we see, the idea of being a sole trader is great, and I'll work when I want, and I'll do this, and I'll be my own boss, and I'll have this great lifestyle. But there's a lot that goes into that.
Oh, totally.
And as I'm sure there's a lot that goes into that, and it's not, and it's not just building the business. And sometimes it's okay. Well, if you want to go and play golf on a Monday morning, then that's cool. But it also means you might have to be working on a Sunday evening, or if the shit hits the fan, or the client wants something, or for us, if there's a problem with the app or whatever, there is no one else. That's the responsibility that I hold, which is, on the one hand, you get that flexibility and you can go to the classroom and you can give your kids lift to sports practice and all of that kind of really cool stuff. But, if the shit hits the fan on Saturday morning,
stops with you, right?
There's no one I can ring. If the client's kicking off because something's gone wrong, and regardless of whether or not it's something that's our fault or not, as the person that's responsible for the satisfaction of my customers, it's my job to sort it out. Doesn't matter whether I'm on holiday in Europe or whether I'm standing on the as I've done many times, standing on the sideline of a kid's sports game. When the phone rings, you answer it, and that's not for everybody. If you want 9 to 5 and you want to get to 5 o'clock on a Friday and shut your computer and not think about it until Monday morning at 9 o'clock, don't go into business for yourself.
Yeah,
because that's not the way it works.
No, it's a harder road, that's for sure. You're on off the beaten path, that's for sure. Tell me a little bit about, do you advise also then sole traders and freelancers, or are you purely around from an invoicing, business perspective? Do you give them founder advice also based on your own advice, or do you keep it?
Not formally. It's not a service that we provide or charge for. And also, again, given that we are finance, accounting, finance, tax, that kind of thing, we are only the provider of software.
Yeah.
Often, our users will come to us and say, what should I do? And we're like, well, we can't really tell you. You speak to the ATO accountant, and you then come back and tell us what they've told you to do, and we can show you how to do it. But we're not going to tell you which is right and which is wrong. Yeah. But, obviously, like this, I mean, I guess I tell my own story, I'd be on, whether it be on podcasts or at conferences or something, I'm happy to always share the benefit of my expertise, but, whether or not that's right for someone else is a decision for them to make.
I think you have to work it out on the inside, right? I always say the answers come from within, and you have to sit with those uncomfortable moments. And if something's not working, I said to a client this morning, nothing changes if nothing changes, because nothing changes if nothing changes. I even have to say it to myself at times. And I think that, we quite often look for that external advice, and yet we've got all the answers from within. Tell us a little bit about the platform and how much that's evolved. I mean, it's interesting times from a SaaS perspective and AI coming into play. Although, it's been the themes of the conversations I've been having recently with my guests compared to probably even 6 months ago, is there feels like there is a little bit more of a, hang on a second, what is all of this? And let me just reassess what I actually need, and what is short term versus, and it's not giving me what I thought it could give me versus, what are the longer term tools, if that makes sense. And I'm intrigued to get your view on it all and what you're seeing, and especially even with your own platform.
So, I mean, when we started, the goal, or I guess our addressable market, was mostly people who were using spreadsheets. 10 years ago, there were no dedicated solutions for sole traders. So some people used software that wasn't quite right or too complex. As we said, a lot of people were just using spreadsheets and manuals. So we were building something that was automating really the core and the basic features and functions of running business finances. And over the course of that time, we have developed out the features and functionality and sophistication 100x. It's a very, very different app than it was 10 years ago. But also now, consumer and customer expectations is absolutely on a different level than it was. The accounting and software piece, it's not enough just to have an app that does it. It has to be automated. It has to be able to connect to peripheral different features and functions, whether that's your bank account, credit card, other bits of software, project management, CRM, whatever. So, where the main course used to be accounting software, now it's just the core around where everything else is built, and that core is just supposed to work seamlessly. So what our customers expect now is very different, and to the point where recently we've just released a brand new app, our first app outside of that, which is a kilometer tracker. So for sole trader businesses, people who need to track their kilometers either in a logbook or
brilliant.
So it's a standalone app. It works seamlessly. It's built to the same standards that we've built the main Rounded app. We've built an integration into the main Rounded app. So essentially you set it all up and then you forget about it. And then it just takes all of your business Ks and it punches it back into the main Rounded app and it calculates all your tax and you see it there on your dashboard and everything's itemized and it works beautifully. So that's our first attempt at kind of expanding out of just having that core accounting app. So again, the customer expectation has changed, and what we're trying to deliver now for our customers is very much more sophisticated than it used to be. And obviously, you've asked a few times about AI, which is a really interesting one for us. And we found that a number of our competitors are trying to kind of as a lot of software companies out there now are trying to jam AI into every nook and cranny that they have to various degrees of success. We have taken a slightly more cautious approach because we believe fundamentally in two things: that a successful business owner really needs to understand their figures.
Yeah. 100%.
Which means they need to be making decisions, not, abdicating that to AI, which ultimately at the moment, an LLM doesn't know anything.
Yeah, I had to do some forecasting for a while ago, and I was like, there was
it can't learn anything.
No.
And so we all know that AI is prone to hallucinations, right? And so we look at that and we go, well, do we want to put our users in a situation where they can trust, where they are potentially putting false information into a tax return because of a mistake that our own AI is making? We're not particularly interested in going down that path. So we believe there's a lot AI can do. Things like optical character recognition now. So when you take a picture of a receipt and it pulls information in, or we're using AI to do things like identify spam emails, for instance. So, we might get malicious actors using Rounded to try and send dodgy PayPal invoices or whatever, phishing and spam. So, AI is great for that. And it means that we don't have to do anything manually. So there's a lot of stuff where we are thoughtfully using AI to help improve the overall customer experience. But, are we going to put AI into Rounded and go, AI is going to do all of your expenses and calculate your tax return and do all of that? Right now, that's not where we think things are at. And we're a little bit reticent to do that.
Which comes back to the short term and long term, right? Like, I think it is around assessing what is actually required from an artificial intelligence versus what is required from a SaaS platform, a human intelligence perspective. And I think that more and more I'm observing and noticing it from many of the guests I'm talking to, and even my own perspective, is that there is just a little bit of a hang on a second, like, it's just things are just calming down a little bit because there is this reticence, like you say, to just hand everything over. And I think that's really important. I've got a couple of final questions for you. What, from a co-founder perspective, obviously coming in, What's that been like for you, and how does that work? Like, what keeps the magic alive? Because 10 years is no small feat when it comes to being in a partnership. What
Yep.
does it work for you guys?
Yep. I mean, it's an interesting one. Like, I think I can't, given that it was a punt for both of us, right? And we didn't know each other before we were introduced by a mutual contact. We've both been incredibly lucky that we, are largely aligned philosophically on what we want out of the business. That's, business direction and velocity is one of the largest causes of co-founder, tension. And we've always been on the same page. That I guess, and that's down to luck, really, and the fact that that's lasted as long as it has. I think the other thing is that we have entirely different skill sets. So Grant, my co-founder, it was his idea. He built Rounded for him. He was a freelancer and a sole trader looking for a solution, couldn't find one, built Rounded, and so he's our head of product. He sets the product direction and is the driving force probably behind how we've evolved the product, and with some special comments from me every now and again. And my skill set has always been on that front end, customer facing, customer satisfaction, that sort of thing, sales, revenue growth. And increasingly my role is really to try and remove the hurdles for him to do his best work, because that's the way the company works best. And so there's very little overlap or feeling that we're treading on each other's toes, because I'm incapable of doing what he does. So I have to trust him. And to a certain extent, it's the same the other way, and either that or he's just not interested in doing what I do. So we just have very different skill sets.
Yeah, I love it. The yin and the yang. It's great. And then, so my last question is on customer relationship and gold. I always call it gold star standard. For all the listeners out there, what is your gold star standard when it comes to Rounded? And because I think it's really important. Like, I think we quite often sometimes forget that the customer comes first. Like, it has to. And I've always been a massive believer in that, in terms of relational versus transactional, when I say customer comes first, because
So I agree with that to an extent, right? So I guess the first thing is, when Rounded started, we had no money for anything, just keeping the lights on. That was it, right? And so when I'm looking at how do I grow this company, the first thing I realized is that the larger enterprise companies didn't really give a shit about sole traders who were on their lowest plan, who were giving them $20 a month. And so one of the things that I identified really quickly is that, people felt unheard, unvalued. It was difficult to get support. They were dismissed, and they weren't valued by the companies that were providing solutions at the time. And so I realized that the first thing I could do for free, which wouldn't cost me anything, and at the time I was, didn't have a customer success team, it was me. I could make every customer feel like they were valued. And no one else was doing that at the time. It sounds strange, but that became something that Rounded was known for. And, even now, if you send the customer team, yes, we use a little bit of AI in our customer success now because it's getting better, but you'll get a human response most of the time within 30 seconds. Still to this day, with thousands of customers, the same as when we only had 10 customers.
That's great.
And that became something that Rounded was known for. And that became a driver of our early organic growth, because that was something that no one else was doing. Now, taking that about, the customer comes first. The customer does always come first, but that doesn't mean always saying yes.
That's exactly what I mean. I'm talking exactly about the value and
So in the early days,
your way or the
probably
highway sort of thing. I think
we got ourselves maybe in a bit of trouble through being quite reactive and like, this customer's not happy. Let's change this over here, and it became whack-a-mole. So you change a green button to a blue button, and the people who wanted the blue button are all happy, but everybody who liked the green button starts complaining.
Yeah.
So in the end, I found that one of the things I learned and kind of semi-joke about is that, good customer service is finding endlessly creative ways to say no. So again, we've got better at that and better at discerning, what feedback we should be reacting to and what feedback we have to politely ignore.
Yeah. Oh, I call it dropping the mic.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to just drop the mic and be prepared, coming right back to hedging your bets, risk taking calculated risk. Sometimes you just have to say no. And then and quite often you'll be surprised. And this is a big one for the listeners. I mean, I did it once with a really big client in Australia that everyone would know, internationally actually. And the request was absolutely ridiculous. We'd done 3 rounds of pitching. We were up against, I think, 6 or so different agencies at the time. And I got a call from procurement requesting that they wanted to put out a new brief because they weren't getting the work that they wanted. This was in COVID and they wanted us to repitch all over again. And there was not one thing that made me need to think about it. And I just said, absolutely not doing that. And they were like, sorry. And I said, no. I just said, no, I am not putting my team through any more pitching. I said, what I can offer you is a workshop in terms of working through the questions that you have. I am pulling out of the pitch as we speak. So I wish you all the very best. Guess what? 24 hours later, they called me and we ended up winning the business.
Yeah. Happens that way sometimes. And there's a little bit of, there's sometimes you can gain huge amount of confidence, by doing that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of upside sometimes to saying no.
Yeah. Oliver, I'm conscious that we've gone over time, and I know that you've no doubt got quite a bit on today and also just coming back from your trip. So you're probably doing a bit of catch up as well. So how do we find out more about Rounded? How do we find out more about you? And if I'm in Australia and I'm a freelancer or a sole trader and I'm interested in using the app, do I just download the app and get on and test it out?
Yeah. Well, we're available via any computer browser, so you can go to rounded.com.au. We also have Android and iOS smartphone apps. So if you search Rounded Accounting in your app store of choice, and then if you're interested in our kilometer tracker, which is a separate app, that's called Rounded Tracks. TRAX. And so, if you're interested in working out how you can simplify tracking your business kilometers for your tax return, Rounded Tracks, just search that in iOS, and Android will be coming probably in a week.
Amazing. Oliver, thank you so much. I'm wishing you utmost success as you continue on the Rounded journey. And great insights today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, B. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers, you too.